Hello, you're watching Sightline on MNB World, an interview program that invites various guests for a conversation on important theme. And today we have in our studio United Nations Population Fund representative to China and country director for Mongolia, Dr. Justine Coulson. Hello, how are you doing?
Hello, Salonga. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
My pleasure. Justine Coulson is the United Nations Population Fund representative to China and country director for UNFPA in Mongolia. She joined UNFPA in 2016 as the Deputy Regional Director for East and Southern Africa. Prior to this, she spent over 10 years with MSI Reproductive Choices in a number of country leadership positions, and finally as the Regional Director for Asia. Dr. Coulson began her career in international development as the Social Development and Gender Advisor in the Global Urban Research Unit at the University of Newcastle before moving to the Economic Policy Unit at Save the Children. She has worked in Asia, Latin America, and Africa across a broad portfolio of development issues, always with a focus on addressing inequality and upholding the rights of women and girls. She holds a PhD in Gender and International Development from the University of Newcastle and a Bachelor of Arts in Latin American Studies from the University of Liverpool. I would like to start our interview with the purpose of your visit to Mongolia. What outcomes do you expect from this current working visit to Mongolia?
So this is actually the first time I've been to Mongolia, so I've really been taken with the hospitality of Mongolian culture, so I'm really enjoying my time here. I'm actually based in Beijing, but I'm the country director for UNFPA here, so I provide strategic support to our team on the ground. And we've just signed our new 5-year country programme with the government of Mongolia, which essentially guides our work for the next 5 years, responding to the priorities that the government have identified for us. And this was very much developed in consultation with many stakeholders across Mongolian society. So I really wanted to come and understand more about the culture, about the context in which we're delivering, and really meet with our partners and see how we can best help Mongolia deliver on its sustainable development targets.
I see. Recently, Mongolia and the UNFPA has signed the action plan on child and maternal and reproductive health. And could you tell us about this action plan? What is the outcome of this action plan?
So I think, first of all, it's really important to say that while sometimes we think about things like reproductive health as women's issues, we actually can't have sustainable development for the whole society, and we can't have universal health coverage without investing in maternal, child and reproductive health. And so the government's commitment to this action plan, I think, really shows what importance the government gives to these issues. And actually, Mongolia's already seen a lot of achievement in this area. So, for example, when the Millennium Development Goals came to an end in 2015, Mongolia was one of only 9 countries in the world that actually achieved MDG 5, which was a commitment to reducing maternal deaths by a certain number by 2015, which it achieved. In the same way, we've seen big progress in Mongolia over the last 5 years in terms of reducing teenage pregnancies, for example. So we've already seen a lot of progress in this area, but as UNFPA, as we enter into our new country programme supporting government, we're focusing on things like strengthening midwifery services, supporting the government to help doctors in remote areas connect with experts through telemedicine. We're supporting the government in terms of ensuring that any woman who wants to use family planning can access the family planning of her choice in her local facility.
During the 2019 International Conference on Population Development, Mongolia made a commitment to reduce the infant mortality and ensure sustainable family development. And what kind of progress was made after that?
So maybe first of all I can explain a little bit about what the International Conference on Population and Development is, because it sounds like a very long, dry thing. But actually this was a true revolution in the world. So just over 25 years ago, all countries, all governments in the world met in Cairo and signed the Programme of Action for the International Conference on Population and Development. And what that meant was, for the very first time, governments recognise that when we talk about population, it's not about numbers, it's actually about people. And a recognition that governments needed to commit to investing in the social well-being and development of people. And at the same time, there was a recognition of reproductive rights, which now we take for granted, but at the time was really quite revolutionary. So a recognition of a woman's right to choose when, if, and how many children she has, and also the importance of making family planning available to everybody. So this is a really important agreement for us that we continue to work with governments on, over almost the last 30 years. So as you say, we celebrated 25 years of the ICPD in Nairobi, where Mongolia made a very strong commitment. But a few weeks after that, we actually saw the very first cases of COVID. And of course, the world's been a very different place then. And so a lot of our focus following those ambitious commitments that were made in Nairobi is supporting governments in terms of continuation of services. So continuing to work with the government of Mongolia in terms of how can we continue to provide safe maternal health services during COVID-19? How can we ensure that women can still access their family planning methods that they need so they don't suffer an unintended pregnancy? How can we make sure that women who were locked up at home with their partners and were suffering from gender-based violence could also get the support that they needed? And I think we also recognise globally that Mongolia did a very good job in terms of responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. So a very rapid vaccination coverage, a very focused lockdown period that I think has really allowed the country to open up very quickly. And we see that in terms of the health outcomes. So whilst we did see, unfortunately, a spike in maternal deaths during COVID-19, we've seen Mongolia has very quickly then seen those numbers drop back to the levels we saw before, and a commitment to continue to reduce maternal deaths in the country.
This year marks the 30th milestone of ICPD. And marking the milestone, what kind of activities and programs the UNFPA is planning now?
So we'll actually be celebrating 30 years of the International Conference on Population Development next year. And I think it's important to say that this isn't a UNFPA event. This is a global event for governments and national partners from across the world to come together and both celebrate achievements, share experiences, look at best practices. And so the way the process starts is each country has an opportunity to report on its progress over the last 5 years. So for example, here in Mongolia, it will be the Ministry of Labour and Social Protection that leads on that process. That report then goes into an Asia Pacific conference where we'll be looking at the progress made across the region, and the Mongolian delegation will meet with other countries to discuss learning, and then next year we will have the big celebration. So for us, our commitments that we've made under our country programme in Mongolia to support the governments completely align to many of the issues under the International Conference on Population and Development. And so that work will continue into next year.
For the last couple of years, the international community has suffered a lot from the COVID-19 pandemic, and looking back on the region, has the COVID-19 had its impact on sexual and reproductive health?
So inevitably, across the world, when COVID-19 started, we really had no rules or regulations or protocols to deal with this. It was completely unprecedented in terms of the global scale of the pandemic. So inevitably what we saw was governments bringing in strict lockdowns to try and control the spread of the pandemic. But at the same time, what that meant was therefore maybe women who were pregnant, who needed to get to hospital, couldn't get to hospital. Maybe there was no public transport available. At the same time, inevitably, as health systems struggle to respond to the huge demand from services from people struggling with COVID-19, we saw health resources being pulled out of some services such as maternal health and put into COVID-19. But pregnancy continued, the need for family planning continued. And so we worked with governments, including in Mongolia, to really share the most up-to-date clinical protocols and guidance to make sure that services could continue safely. We provided emergency response kits and supplies to help governments make sure that they had full COVID prevention measures in all services. I think also we need to recognise that the data on gender-based violence, we saw an increase in gender-based violence again across the world, where because women very often found themselves at home, unfortunately, with their abusive partner and unable to get out of the house and get away, and the pressure of being in the household during lockdowns, we did see an increase in GBV. I mean, both in the Asia-Pacific region and globally, and a lot of statistics show an increase, for example, in calls to helplines that we set up across the world with our partners to support women who are experiencing gender-based violence. So, you know, following that period, which was very a form of acute support to make sure we could do everything possible to keep services going, now we've been working with governments more on looking at recovery plans as they come out of COVID, and ensuring that as governments put together their national recovery plans, we're really looking at you know, the needs for investment in youth development, the need to maintain and grow investment in sexual and reproductive health, the need to ensure that even as schools were online, for example, that young people continue to be able to receive comprehensive sexuality education, which is a key aspect of their education. And actually here, it's recognised as a formal part of the national curriculum.
You have just mentioned that the United Nations Population Fund attaches great importance to population as people, not by number. So what kind of policy should the government maintain in order to promote the sustainable development of its population?
So I think when we look at population development, we need to recognise that all 17 SDGs are all about human development, every single one. And so as UNFPA, we primarily focus on Sustainable Development Goal 3, which is on health, Sustainable Development Goal 5, which is on women and gender equality. But we do that within the UN family in Mongolia, where we actually support all the SDGs and we support the government of Mongolia on human development. I think one of the areas I'd like to highlight in the context of Mongolia is the fact that you have a youthful population. And you know, what we see again in countries that have this growing youth population is the importance of making adequate investments across all key areas to build the resilience and well-being of young people who are essentially the future of tomorrow. Yes, they're your future adult population that will be contributing to the continuing socioeconomic development of Mongolia. And so we very often talk about harnessing what we call a demographic dividend. And what this means is that if when people are young, we invest in education, we invest in their health and well-being in terms of including their knowledge about their own health and how to guard their health. We invest in skills for life, such as maybe entrepreneurial skills or leadership skills. And we also, I think, educate young people in how to be positive citizens in their societies and communities. We argue that if you make all of those investments, as that large youth population moves into adulthood, it will be able to play a much greater and more positive role in supporting the future development of Mongolian society. And so a lot of work that we do on youth development under our youth programme, under our new country programme, actually looks at investing in those different areas. So we do a lot of work on supporting adolescent and young people's sexual and reproductive health and overall knowledge about health. We have supported the development of youth development centres here, where young people go to learn new skills, to share experience with their peers, to build their leadership skills. And so, you know, this is a key area of focus as we move forward.
When we talk about the operation of the UN organizations, we cannot live without mentioning the SDG goal number 5 on gender equality, and what kind of programs and activities currently UNFPA is planning or implementing in this direction.
So gender equality continues to be a global concern, and you and your viewers may have seen that recently the Secretary General made a speech at what we call the Commission on the Status of Women, where he said we will need another 300 years to achieve true gender equality for women across the world. Fortunately, in Mongolia, we've actually seen a lot more progress. And last year, the Mongolian government actually provided its report to the Commission on the Status of Women, where there was a recognition for many of the advances that Mongolia has made on supporting women in their society. But we do still need to work on a number of aspects of gender equality. So, for example, gender-based violence continues to be very high in Mongolia. But I have to say that I've really noticed engaging with government partners both at national level, and I had an opportunity to go to Darhan and meet with the deputy governor there, also engaging with people across the health sector and also CSOs and other professionals in Mongolia. There really is a very strong commitment at all different levels and across all sectors, I think, in terms of calling out gender-based violence and really working to bring gender-based violence to an end in Mongolia. So in terms of our work to support government and national partners, we were there to help support the establishment of what we call one-stop service centres. So these are spaces where women and their children who may be fleeing an abusive context at home are able to come and find safety and also really start to rebuild their lives, whether they need legal advice, whether they need advice on how they can now set up a home separately. Maybe we need to give them support in terms of entrepreneurial skills, maybe to start their own business so they have some income. So that's one way that we've been working. Also, you know, Mongolia introduced the domestic violence bill back in 2005. We've seen that revised for 2016. So we continue to work with our partners across the country in terms of implementing that law, because it's good to have a law, but actually it means very little unless you really
it should be implemented.
Yes, yeah. You need to work on ensuring that people understand what the law says. You need to make sure it's fully implemented. And in fact, just today I met with the Parliamentary Secretariat talking about how we're going to continue to work with them to review the law and see how well it's working across the country, obviously through national consultation. So that continues to be a key aspect of our work in Mongolia, but I really remain very hopeful because of the level of commitment I see that there's a lot more work that can be done to really improve the situation of survivors of gender-based violence, but I think also really work together as a society, and I include men and boys in this very much, to really prevent gender-based violence in the future.
Thank you very much for providing detailed information on UNFPA.
Thank you so much, Salonga.
Well, that was the new episode of the Sightline. We'll see you next time with more stories and updates. Have a nice day. Goodbye.